If you walk through Bangkok today, it hardly feels like an economy that's lost momentum. The skyline is filled with new condominiums and shopping malls, while rapid transit lines expand across the city. And yet the economic data tells a very different story. Growth has stalled dramatically over the past 10 years, while neighboring Vietnam has surged, expanding nearly 3 times as quickly. And across the region, a simple narrative has taken hold. Vietnam is rising while Thailand is falling, increasingly labeled as the sick man of ASEAN. But the comparison can be misleading, and the real story is more complicated. Many developing economies follow a surprisingly similar path as they industrialize. In the early stages of development, countries grow rapidly by offering relatively inexpensive labor to global manufacturers. Factories move in, exports expand, and workers shift from agriculture into industrial jobs. Beginning in the 1970s, Thailand followed this pattern almost perfectly, becoming an attractive destination for multinational manufacturers seeking a base in Southeast Asia. Infrastructure improved, logistics networks expanded, and wages remained far lower than those in developed economies, while neighboring countries were dealing with conflict or political turbulence. Investment flowed in as factories producing automobiles, electronics, and manufacturing components spread across the country's industrial corridors. Exports soon became central to the economy, and Thailand eventually earned the nickname the Detroit of Southeast Asia. For several decades, this strategy delivered remarkable results. Industrial production expanded while incomes rose, and Thailand moved from a largely agricultural economy into the ranks of upper middle income countries. But in economics, success gradually changes the equation. As incomes rise, the cost advantages that originally attracted factories begin to fade. Manufacturers start comparing locations again, and countries with lower labor costs suddenly look more attractive. At that point, growth can no longer depend on cheap labor, and this is where many countries begin to struggle. Economists call it the middle income trap. When a country becomes too expensive to compete with poorer economies, yet not advanced enough to compete with the richest ones. Today, Thailand appears to be navigating precisely that challenge, the difficult transition from a low-cost manufacturing economy to a high-productivity one. And this is where Vietnam enters the story. Over the past 15 years, Vietnam has emerged as one of the fastest-growing manufacturing hubs in the world. Multinational companies such as Samsung, Intel, and Foxconn have invested heavily in the country as global supply chains diversify across Asia. Because of this, comparisons with Thailand have become increasingly common, but the two countries are not actually in direct competition. Vietnam's main competitors are other lower-income manufacturing hubs such as Bangladesh, Cambodia, and India, while Thailand has already moved beyond the low-cost manufacturing phase. Vietnam is catching up quickly, but manufacturing wages are still approximately half the cost of Thailand, and in reality, all of these economies are following the same development model, just at different stages. And once an economy reaches middle-income status, competing primarily on cost becomes increasingly difficult. At that point, continued growth depends on something else entirely: productivity. Generating more economic value per worker through technology, skills, and innovation. A transition many developing economies struggle to achieve, but the only durable path beyond the middle-income trap. Economies must move from assembling products and manufacturing components to designing and creating them. And this is where Thailand finds itself today. Only a handful of countries have successfully made the leap to the next stage of development. Economists often describe this transition around 3 pillars: human capital, investment, and competition. Education is the key. Workers need the skills to solve engineering problems, manage complex production systems, and build innovative industries. And Thailand has struggled to adapt, as the education system has long emphasized rote learning and discipline. As a result, Thai students perform poorly in international standardized assessments that emphasize problem-solving skills. New technologies, advanced manufacturing, and innovative industries also require sustained capital investment. Yet Thailand's financial system remains relatively conservative, a legacy of the Asian financial crisis of 1997, when the baht collapsed and the country required an IMF bailout. In response, regulators imposed stricter lending standards. This created a far more stable banking system, but it also made banks excessively cautious about lending to smaller firms in emerging industries, which are often the main source of disruptive innovation. This reinforced an already top-heavy economic structure where many key sectors are dominated by large family-owned conglomerates with steady profits and relatively limited competitive pressure. And when competition weakens, companies have fewer incentives to innovate, adopt new technologies, or invest aggressively in productivity improvements. These three factors have helped stifle Thailand's transition beyond the middle-income trap. But it's also led to another problem, because sluggish productivity has also meant lower wage growth, even as the cost of living has risen alongside economic development. With relatively low interest rates, household borrowing has surged to keep up with costs, pushing consumer debt to nearly 90% of GDP. And as larger portions of household income go toward debt repayment, consumer spending ultimately weakens. That feeds back into the business climate, encouraging greater caution and lower investment, which leads to ever weaker productivity growth, stagnant wages, and even less spending. As a result, the Thai economy has now experienced more than 11 consecutive months of deflation. And while people often worry about inflation, economists view deflation or falling prices as even more dangerous. It raises the risk of a deflationary spiral where consumers postpone purchases, businesses cut production and wages, unemployment rises, and an economy slowly slips into recession. And Thailand faces another major hurdle. The country's fertility rate has fallen dramatically to around 1.2 children per woman, one of the lowest in the world. The working age population has already begun to shrink, meaning future economic growth will depend almost entirely on productivity gains and stronger competitiveness. This will require a major overhaul of the education, business, and investment systems simultaneously and urgently. Whether Thailand will successfully make that transition remains uncertain, and the alternative is likely a long-term slowdown as growth and wages stall. Meanwhile, Vietnam appears to be learning from Thailand's experience. The government has invested heavily in science and engineering education while encouraging companies to pair foreign investment with skills training and technology transfer. Vietnamese students also perform strongly in international academic assessments. With a large working-age population, Vietnam still has time to prepare for the middle-income trap, but success is far from certain. And all of this leads to an important conclusion. The narrative of rivalry between Thailand and Vietnam is largely a false dichotomy. Both countries are navigating the same economic development cycle, one that only a handful of economies have ever fully escaped. They are not competitors in that struggle, they are simply at different stages of the same journey. And one key factor shaping Thailand's current stagnation is the baht. Because despite sluggish economic growth, the currency sits at multi-year highs against the US dollar, adding pressure to exporters and the tourism sector. And if you want to understand why the baht remains so strong, click right here.